text for our sermon this morning is our Old Testament reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Listen again to these words from that reading. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And from later in the reading, God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord. Amen. You may be seated. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, as we continue this morning in our sermon series, the Sleepless Disciple, the Restless Steward, we're talking about all of those things that can so easily rob us of our sleep at night. And certainly, when we talk about that and we talk about how we manage what God has given us, one of the quantities that we're constantly trying to manage is our time. And it's the way that we manage our time that quite often leads us to lose sleep at night. It's the busyness. It's the fact that we have so many things that we need to get done that we didn't get done today that are still waiting for us tomorrow. And so certainly there's a place for us to talk about how we manage our time. Now this is a stewardship series. The word steward or stewardship, to us it sounds like a church word, but it's really just a King James word. And in the time of the King James Bible, when that Bible was translated, a steward or stewardship was a very common concept. Everybody understood it. When King James went away, when he left his castle for whatever reason to go to some other part of his kingdom or to go to war or something like that, there was a steward. And the steward's job was to take care of what belonged to the king. So very simply, a steward is someone who manages what belongs to someone else. And when King James would come home, he would expect that that steward would have done his job well, that everything would have been managed properly, that his property would be at least in as good a shape and perhaps even increased if he had a really good steward who was caring for it. So as we talk about stewardship, we're talking about managing what belongs not to us but to God. And certainly our time isn't as much ours as we think it is. We can't hold on to a moment. Every moment comes to us freely and passes from us freely. All we can do is choose what we do within the time that God has given us. So as we begin to talk about that this morning, I have an object lesson to share with you. It's one it's not mine. I got it from another preacher who attributed it to John Maxwell, who's a leadership writer and speaker. I think probably some of you are familiar with it. It goes something like this. Imagine that this contains your time. Now, for some of you, you probably have to look ahead on your calendar a couple of years to find a section of time that looks like this, that's empty, because you know what happens. You have your time, and you start to fill that time with various obligations. And each of these rocks is some obligation. Maybe it's something you have to do for work, or maybe it's that time that you had to spend with the family reunion, or it's the organizing that you did for that project at church. And one by one, we just start to fill our time up with obligations. And we add more, and we add more, until it's full. And then, there are a few that just didn't make it in. And we add more obligations until our time is all filled up, don't we? It's full. Except you know how this works because you live in the same world that I do. Yeah, I have no more time this week except that, your Aunt Mabel is coming. Okay, I can move some things around. Yep, we can spend the afternoon with Aunt Mabel. That's fine. I can fit in just a few more things. Let me just find a little more space in my life. I got a little more time. And now it's full, right? Because you know how this works. Do you have just 5 minutes? Sure, I got 5 minutes. 15 minutes later. I just need to close my eyes just for a minute. Where did that hour and a half go? I'm just going to rest in front of the TV, in front of the computer screen for a minute, just a minute. And then 2 hours later, you know how this works. We're going to fit even more in until we really get it full. It seems to be the way that we approach our time, isn't it? We just keep adding more and more and more until there's no room for anything left. Now, if you ask me, this is kind of an ugly-looking approach to time. Now, John Maxwell would tell you that the point is not that you can always fit more in. The point is you have to put the big rocks in first. Once the rest goes in, you can't fit any more big rocks in. So we have to make a judgment. We have to decide, what are the big rocks in my life? Is it my family? Is it my church? Is it my work? What are the big rocks? The big rocks have to go in first, because if we don't put them in first, there's not going to be any room for them. Now, if you live like I do and you have your calendar where you write everything down, or your computerized day planner where you start to put in all your obligations, you can watch this happen. You have this week and it's open and you start to put things in, and you keep adding and you keep adding, and pretty soon you realize that time that you intended to take off, that rest, or that time for your family that you wanted to have, just doesn't fit in. If it doesn't go in first, it doesn't make it. That's the point. So you have to know what your priorities are, and then you have to put your priorities into your life first. Now, that's good advice. There's wisdom in that. But the truth is, this whole approach to time is broken. This whole approach to time, where we have this quantity of time and we have to fill it up, and if we don't take care of what we put in there, we're going to run out of time for other things. This is based in a broken world. And this is not God's design for time. God's design for time starts in Genesis, right? God creates the world, and he creates Adam and Eve, and he creates them to live forever, to have an eternity, to have an endless quantity of time. In an eternity, there's nothing that gets left out. There's no need to say, I have to squeeze this out so I can squeeze this in. God's design for time is eternal. It's not like this. This is the design for time that we're left with after Adam and Eve take a bite of the fruit, right? The fruit that's so appealing, not because it's fruit, but because of the mystery behind it. Can I really be like God? And God said, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. In the day that you eat of it, there will be an end to your time, and you will only have so much. And in that case, you will have to choose what goes in, and whatever doesn't make it in is never going to make it. And the world was broken. And God decreed that there would be a lid on the jar, and nothing else would get in. And the day that they ate of it, spiritually they died, and physical death was sure to follow. And in that day, time became a quantity of which we have only so much. And so there's only so many things that are going to fit in. But that's the world as it was broken. That's not what God intended. God's design for time is utterly different. It is completely different. God's design for time, you can't even picture it like this. It's designed for us to live eternally, for us to have forever, for us never to run out, not a quantity that we can run out of. So you can't even really put a picture of that in your brain, right? How can you picture something that's infinite? You can't see it, but you can hear it. Do you hear God's design for time? It's not a space to be filled. It's a rhythm. It's a rhythm that began even before we were created. And it's a rhythm that we are invited to join. God's design for time starts in Genesis. And there was evening, and there was morning. Did you ever notice that? Did you ever wonder about that in the creation account? There's evening and there's morning, even before there's a planet that's turning. God broke time down into a rhythm. And that rhythm was marked by days. And the days existed even before there was a sun or there was a planet that was turning in order to mark them. God designed us to live within a rhythm. And it's a rhythm, if you listen, more than half of that rhythm is silence. It's the time between. It's the rest. God designed us to live in a rhythm with a whole lot of the stuff that we squeeze out because we're so busy trying to cram an eternity's worth of life into 72 years. But that's not God's design. God's design has rest. It has a rhythm. And it starts with evening, right? The day starts with when the sun goes down. There was evening, there was morning the first day. And so the way that God designed us to live is to start with this time of rest. If you lived on the equator, you would have just about every day, you'd have about 6 hours, or you'd have about 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness. living where we do, it averages to about that if you take the whole year. In other words, evening is half, morning is half. Half the day for work, half the day for rest. This is the way that God designed us to live. And not just that, but then day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, Sabbath. Not just half of every day, but one day of every week devoted to rest, to a time for us to be regenerated, for us to be together, to have relationships, to build relationships with one another, and to build our relationship with God. See, what happens when we approach time this way in our broken world is all of a sudden Pastor Kelm has a sermon series, or has a children's message, and he talks about time for Bible study or time for prayer, and we all think, yep, got to fit that in there somewhere. What's going to give? It's our approach to time in a broken world. And all of a sudden our relationship with God becomes one more obligation for us to try to fit into a jar that's already full. This is not God's design. God's intent for us is for our relationship with Him to flow out of that abundance of time that He gives us to rest. To watch as He does His work for 12 full hours before He invites us to get up in the morning and to join it. This is God's design. It's a rhythm. And it's a rhythm that invites us to be a part of it. Now I'm telling you what God's design is for us. I'm not going to claim that it's an option for you. Not in its entirety, certainly. I know better. I live in the same real world that you do. In fact, as I was preparing this sermon this week, I told Katie, I feel like such a hypocrite. Because I tried to take a day off on Monday. I tried to take a day where I could work on some other work besides the work that I do here. And so what happened is some stuff got squeezed out of my jar, and I spent the whole rest of the week trying to squeeze it back in. It's the real world that we live in. And yet at the same time, I kept listening to this rhythm all week long, hearing God's invitation saying, I made it dark for all of those hours because I want you to rest. I want you to be with me. I want you to spend time in your relationships with your family and with your friends and with your neighbors and with me, and I have given you an abundance of that time, and this is my desire for you. I wanted to give you an entire day. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Sabbath is rest. Holy is set apart for God. It's a day to pray. It's a day to play. And you hear this rhythm. And I don't know about you, but when I hear a rhythm, it makes me want to join, doesn't it? That's what a rhythm is. You walk into a room where people are clapping along to a beat, and you want to clap along with them. You hear that beat in the back of your mind as you walk into a place where music is playing, and your toe just starts tapping all by itself. A rhythm is an invitation to participate. This rhythm that God has created, it's an invitation for you to participate. It's not another law. It's not one more thing for you to try to cram into a jar where there's no space for it. No, it's an invitation. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's an invitation. And after listening to that invitation all week long, I found myself wanting to participate in it. So finally, Katie and I sat down Friday night, and we said, well, we can't do this exactly. We don't have the opportunity. We can't just shut things off at 6 p.m. We got kids to get to bed. I'm working here till 8 o'clock a lot of nights. But maybe we can shut things off at 8. I can hear the rhythm. I want to be a part of it. Maybe we can step into that rhythm at 8 o'clock. And by that time, we're going to say if the dishes aren't done, the dishes aren't done. If the laundry's not put in the dryer, the laundry's going to stay where it's at. And we're going to take some time, and it's going to be time for relationships with each other, relationships with God. I don't have the option of taking Sundays off. But there's a Tuesday. It's my day off. Maybe that doesn't have to be the day when I work on the car. Maybe that doesn't have to be the day when I get the taxes done or get the paperwork worked out. It's a day of rest. A day to pray and a day to play. A day to be with God and a day to be with others. This is God's intent. It's the rhythm. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to work that out. In fact, we were having trouble just last night. It was day 2. And it didn't come together the way that we envisioned it. But I can hear the rhythm. And I want to participate. See, because I know what it's like when you live life under the lid. I know how hard it is to try to fit everything in. And I know that when I'm living like this, it's no wonder that we can't sleep at night, right? You're trying to cram an eternity into 72 years where you hit bed running. You kind of collapse into bed because you have no other choice because your body just gives out on you. It's no surprise when your brain keeps going, you can't fall asleep. That's life under the lid, but that's not God's design for me. No wonder it leaves me tired. No wonder it leaves me stressed out. No wonder it leaves me dealing with all the pressures in the world and wearing them on my shoulders. I want to live within the rhythm. And Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Not cram it to the full. Have it to the full. Jesus wants us to have life. And then he does the strangest thing, doesn't he? He dies. I've come that they may have life, and then he goes into a grave. And he takes a rest in the tomb. And the stone is rolled away. And the lid comes off. Not just for him, but for you. Eternity. The very thing you were meant for. And it's yours. There is a time for everything, says the author of Ecclesiastes. And everything is beautiful in its time. Do you hear the rhythm? Don't you want to participate? Amen.